Walker in the Attic by Edogawa Ranpo. Shota Saburo existed as a shadow among men, a specter haunting the margins of Tokyo's bustling streets. His skeletal frame moved with unnatural quietness, as though he had spent a lifetime practicing how to disappear. The walls of his tiny apartment were papered with yellowed crime clippings, each carefully cut article documenting some unsolved mystery that made his dry lips twitch with perverse excitement. By daylight, he performed the pantomime of normalcy as a filing clerk, his ink-stained fingers mechanically sorting documents no one would ever read. But when dusk fell, Saburo would lie perfectly still on his worn futon, listening to the building's secret language, the rhythmic dripping of pipes, the muffled arguments through thin walls, the creaking footsteps of unseen neighbors moving above him. There was something wrong with the way he watched people, not with lust or envy, but with the clinical detachment of an entomologist observing insects under glass. The doctors at the free clinic had muttered about antisocial tendencies and morbid fixations. But Saburo knew better. He wasn't sick. He was simply the only one who understood the fundamental truth, that every human was just meat wrapped in lies, and given the right angle, the right moment, anyone could be opened. The newspapers called them crimes. Saburo thought of them as revelations. It began with a stain, a dark, spreading bloom on the ceiling that appeared after the autumn rains. When Saburo pressed his palm against the damp spot, the wood gave way with a sickening crunch. Splinters bit into his flesh as he tore at the rotten panel, and suddenly, darkness yawned above him. The matchlight revealed a gaping maw of cobwebs and dust, the building's hidden anatomy exposed like a dissected corpse. The crawlspace smelled of dry rot and something else, something metallic and old that made Saburo's saliva glands ache. As he hauled his emaciated frame into the narrow passage, the wooden beams groaned like living things. His elbows scraped against decades of accumulated filth as he inched forward, the match guttering in his trembling hand. Then, illumination. A pencil-thin shaft of light pierced the darkness from a knothole in the floorboards below. Through this accidental porthole, Saburo witnessed a scene of such mundane intimacy, it felt more obscene than any crime scene photo. A young woman undressing for bed, her movements unself-conscious in her solitude. His breath came in short, ragged bursts as he realized the full implication. Every apartment, every private moment, every vulnerable second when the residents believed themselves unobserved, all of it laid bare before him. The house had whispered its secret, and now Saburo would become its dark priest. The knothole became Saburo's sacred altar. Night after night, he would slither through the intestinal darkness of the ceiling space, his ribs scraping against the wooden beams as he moved with the silent precision of a spider. Each apartment offered its own grotesque theater. The aging salaryman who wept into his whiskey, the college student who picked at her skin until it bled, the married couple whose violent lovemaking sounded like a murder in progress. But it was apartment 203 that truly captivated him, the home of Mr. Saito, the retired pharmacist with chronic sinusitis, who slept with his mouth gaping like a dead fish. Saburo observed Saito's nightly ritual with clinical fascination. At precisely 10:15 p.m., the old man would remove his dentures with a wet pop, swallow 3 different colored pills, and collapse into bed with his mouth hanging open beneath the ceiling's weakest board. The gap was perfect. A natural bullseye framed by water-damaged wood that flexed when Saburo pressed his weight against it. The idea came to him as he watched Saito snore one humid August night. It wasn't rage or greed that motivated him, but a pure, almost scientific curiosity. Could it be done? Would the house help him? His fingers trembled as he measured the distance from the knothole to Saito's slack mouth, exactly 47 centimeters. The geometry of murder. He began preparations the next day. At the chemical supply store, he purchased arsenic trioxide under the pretense of rat extermination. In his apartment, he fashioned a crude delivery system from an eyedropper and a length of fishing line. The most challenging part was testing the viscosity. The poison needed to form a perfect droplet that would fall straight down without splattering on the man's face. He practiced for hours with colored water on a photograph of Saito taped to his floor. On the chosen night, the air in the crawlspace was thick enough to chew. Saburo's sweat made the wood slippery as he inched toward apartment 203. Below him, Saito performed his usual routine before collapsing into bed. Saburo waited exactly 17 minutes, enough time for the sleeping pills to take full effect. When he pressed his eye to the knothole, he could see the pink cavern of Saito's mouth rising and falling with each wheezing breath. His hands didn't shake as he positioned the eyedropper. The first droplet caught the moonlight as it fell, a tiny silver bullet that landed perfectly on the back of Saito's tongue. The old man's Adam's apple bobbed instinctively. Saburo counted to 30 before administering the second dose, then the third. By the fourth droplet, Saito's breathing had changed. Shallow, irregular gasps that made his naked chest flutter like a wounded bird. Saburo watched, mesmerized, as the man's fingers clawed weakly at the sheets. There was no dramatic thrashing, just a gradual slowing until the rasping breaths stopped altogether. In the terrible silence that followed, Saburo realized he was smiling. The house had accepted his offering. He remained motionless for 2 full hours, observing how the moonlight traced the progress of death across Saito's face. The slackening jaw, the graying lips, the milky film that gradually clouded the open eyes. Only when the first birds began singing did Saburo carefully retreat, taking pains to leave no trace of his presence except for 4 nearly invisible droplets on the floorboards that would evaporate by morning. Back in his apartment, as dawn painted the crime clippings on his walls with pale light, Saburo carefully added a new article to his collection, a brief notice about a retired pharmacist found dead of natural causes. He ran his fingers over the newsprint like a lover's skin, already imagining where next to position his altar in the dark cathedral of the ceiling. The death of Mr. Saito was ruled as heart failure, an unremarkable end for an elderly man with a history of poor health. The police asked no questions, the neighbors expressed perfunctory sympathy, and Shota Saburo, watching from the shadows, felt something dark and hungry uncoil within him. For weeks, he continued his nocturnal observations, drifting through the ceiling like a phantom. The poison had been a test, a proof of concept. Now, he craved refinement. He studied his neighbors' routines with obsessive precision, noting vulnerabilities. The young woman who left her balcony door unlocked, the businessman who took sleeping pills with his nightly brandy. Each presented an opportunity, a puzzle to be solved. But then, something unexpected happened. The first time Akechi Kogoro entered the narrative, it was through the yellowed pages of a newspaper article, a brief mention of the detective's involvement in unusual death cases, accompanied by a grainy photograph that captured his sharp, calculating gaze. Saburo cut out the clipping with methodical precision, though his scissors lingered a second too long around the detective's piercing eyes. Days passed without incident. Then, one evening, Saburo overheard the landlady mention that Akechi had requested the building's original blueprints, not for any stated investigation, just personal interest. The casualness of it unsettled Saburo more than any direct accusation could have. The true horror began when the morning paper arrived. Akechi had published an article on forensic toxicology, discussing how certain poisons could linger in porous materials, wood for instance, and how minute traces might be detected years later. The piece made no mention of Saito's death, nor of the apartment building, but the implications were unmistakable. Saburo's hands trembled as he turned the page and froze. There, in the obituary section, was a follow-up notice about Saito's natural passing. Someone had circled it in red ink, and beside it, clipped neatly at the edge, was a university disciplinary report from years prior. Saburo's own expulsion for stealing laboratory chemicals. Akechi had never needed to set foot in the building. He had been hunting from afar, tightening the noose with nothing but paper and ink. That night, as Saburo crawled through the ceiling, he noticed something new. Sections of the wooden beams had been marked with small, nearly invisible chalk symbols, chemical notations for arsenic. Whether they were real or imagined, he couldn't tell. But with each creak of the aging timber, he heard the detective's voice whispering through the grain. Wood remembers. The final blow came in the form of a letter not addressed to Saburo, but left conspicuously in the building's shared mailbox, a carbon copy of Akechi's official report to the police, detailing how certain ceiling structures could amplify sound, how poison residues might cling to dust particles, and most damning of all, how a man with chemical knowledge and access to blueprints could move unseen. There was no direct accusation, only cold, irrefutable logic. When the police came the next morning, they found Saburo waiting in the lobby, his clothing smeared with dust from the crawlspace, his fingers stained with newsprint. He offered no resistance as they led him away, only a single shuddering glance upward, where a single drop of moisture clung to a ceiling beam, trembling like a witness refusing to blink. Akechi never appeared in person. But as the officers escorted Saburo past the mailboxes, one of them paused to examine the detective's report more closely. On the back, in small, precise handwriting, was an addendum. Houses keep their secrets in the grain. And high above, in the hollow darkness between floors, the ceiling exhaled its silence, now complete. The house, after all, had whispered its secrets to two men that autumn. One was in prison. The Walker in the Attic is a masterful psychological thriller from Murder on D Street, the iconic short story collection by Edogawa Ranpo, Japan's pioneer of detective fiction, whose works redefined mystery writing in the 20th century. If you enjoyed this chilling tale of obsession and architectural terror, don't forget to subscribe for more classic horror and detective stories. Hit the bell icon so you never miss when we crawl into another dark corner of literature. After all, you never know what might be moving in the shadows above you.